Dear future generations, I think I speak for the rest of us when I say, sorry. Sorry we left you with our mess of a planet. Sorry that we were too caught up in our own doings to do something. Sorry we listened to people who made excuses to do nothing. I hope you forgive us. We just didn't realize how special the earth was. Like a marriage gone wrong, we didn't know what we had until it was gone. For example, I'm guessing you probably know it as the Amazon desert, right? Well, believe it or not, it was once called the Amazon rainforest, and there were billions of trees there, all of them gorgeous. And oh, you don't know much about trees, do you? Well, let me tell you, trees are amazing. I mean, we literally breathe the air they are creating. They clean up our pollution, our carbon. They store and purify water, give us medicine that cures our diseases, food that feeds us, which is why I'm so sorry to tell you that we burn them down. Cut them down with brutal machines, horrific, at a rate of 40 football fields every minute. That's 50% of all the trees in the world gone in the last 100 years. Why? For this. And that wouldn't make me so sad if it weren't so many pictures of leaves on it. You know, when I was a child, I read how the Native Americans had such consideration for the planet that they felt responsible for how they left the land for the next 7 generations. Which brings me great sorrow, because most of us today don't even care about tomorrow. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we put profit above people, greed above need, the rule of gold above the golden rule. I'm sorry we use nature as a credit card with no spending limit, overdrafting animals to extinction, stealing your chance to ever see their uniqueness or become friends with them. Sorry we poison the ocean so much that you can't even swim in them. But most of all, I'm sorry about our mindset, 'cause we had the nerve to call this destruction progress. Hey Fox News, if you don't think climate change is a threat, I dare you to interview the thousands of homeless people in Bangladesh. See, while you were in your penthouse nestled, their homes were literally washed away beneath their feet due to rising sea levels. And Sarah Palin, you said that you love the smell of fossil fuels. Well, I urge you to talk to the kids of Beijing who are forced to wear pollution masks just to go to school. See, you can ignore this, but the thing about truth is, it can be denied, not avoided. So I'm sorry, future generations. I'm sorry that our footprint became a sinkhole and not a garden. I'm sorry that we paid so much attention to ISIS and very little to how fast the ice is melting in the Arctic. I'm sorry we doomed you, and I'm sorry we couldn't find another planet in time to move to. You know what? Cut the beat. I'm not sorry. This future, I do not accept it, because an error does not become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We can redirect this. How? Let me suggest that if a farmer sees a tree that is unhealthy, they don't look at the branches to diagnose it, they look at the root. So like that farmer, we must look at the root and not to the branches of government, not to the politicians run by corporations. We are the root, we are the foundation. This generation, it is up to us to take care of this planet. It is our only home. We must globally warm our hearts and change the climate of our souls and realize that we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature. And to betray nature is to betray us. To save nature is to save us. Because whatever you're fighting for, racism or poverty, feminism, gay rights, or any type of equality, it won't matter in the least. Because if we don't all work together to save the environment, we will be equally extinct. Sorry.
If we don't act today for the climate, if our politicians don't act for the climate today, they're not going to experience what the consequences are, but we will.
Die Politiker würde ich bitten, die Kinder ernst zu nehmen, denn es ist deren Zukunft.
We're not a small group. We're the youth. We're millions and millions of people.
Je mehr Leute auf dieser Demo hier sind, desto mehr Aufsehen erregt es und vielleicht bringen wir ein paar Leute zum Nachdenken und vielleicht können wir auch was verändern.
Ich glaube aber auch, dass das hier erst der Anfang ist von etwas, was noch viel größer werden muss. Und ich habe wirklich, wirklich damit zu kämpfen, hier nicht, dass ihr mir nicht eine Träne runterrollt für diese Energie, die ihr hier anbringt. Und ich bin wirklich euch zutiefst dankbar.
Ich bin hier, weil ich demonstriere für die Zukunft meiner Enkelkinder und meiner Urenkel, die noch nicht geboren sind.
Well, I'm supporting my children because, it's their world we're spoiling.
It's awesome how the kids are teaching us to stand up for their future.
Denn wir lernen ja auch dafür, damit wir leben und ein glückliches Leben haben. Und das geht ja nicht, wenn das Klima schlecht ist.
I'd like to begin by extending a warm welcome to the Global Landscapes Forum audience, because we're going to discuss climate change from a rights perspective, human rights perspective. And that pleases me very much because that was the perspective that I came to climate change. I'd be the first to admit I came quite late. I served for 5 years as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights from 1997 to 2002, and I never spoke about climate change because another part of the UN was dealing with it. It was when I was working in African countries on economic and social rights, the most important rights if you don't have them, rights to food and water and health and education and shelter, that I realised that people were saying things were so much worse when it came to food security, when it came to trying to have a livelihood, because of changes in the weather, changes in the climate, unpredictable changes. And they were very severe, long periods of drought, flash flooding, destroying the village. And I learned stories that I've written in my book on climate justice of building resilience in these difficult circumstances, because there is an injustice in climate change. It affects disproportionately the poorest countries, the poorest communities, indigenous peoples, old people, people with disability, young people, especially when there's either a sudden disaster, and that's happened, for example, at the moment in Mozambique, where there's terrible flooding, and also in Zimbabwe and Malawi, maybe more than 1,000 people killed. Very poor people, very vulnerable, and not responsible. And therefore, we have to have an approach to this issue, which is a moral and justice approach, as well as an economic approach on reducing emissions, etc. I was very supportive of school children getting engaged in this issue. I admired greatly the leadership of Greta Thunberg herself. I watched her outside the Swedish Parliament before anybody had heard of her as a 15-year-old at that time. And then she was at the COP in Katowice, and she was in Davos speaking truth to power. And what children are saying around the world is we are suffering from intergenerational injustice, because our future is not being protected, it's not being secured by you adults who should be doing more. It's a very powerful message, and it's a justice message. I've noted that the children have no problem using the words climate justice because they profoundly understand the concept. And we have an opportunity, we have a window of about 12 years to get back on track of reducing global greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030, so that we're on track then for zero emissions by 2050. And I have a message usually now for every audience that I talk to, so I'll also have this message for all of you, and I'll finish with it. We need to do three things. We need to take seriously, personally, the issue of climate change in our lives. And we've got to do something we weren't doing before. I've become a pescatarian. I no longer eat meat. Secondly, we have to get angry with those who have much more responsibility because they have the power to do more. I'm talking about governments at all levels, not just national government, but in cities, in local government, and of course internationally. And then we have to talk about the power of business, the power of agriculture, the power of transport. These are sectors that have to take seriously their responsibilities. And the third thing, and I think we need to do this more and more, is we must imagine this world we need to be hurrying towards, because it will be a much better world. First of all, it will be a much healthier world, because we won't have the fumes and the air quality, the air pollution of fossil fuels. And secondly, we will have a much fairer world, because to get to that world, we will have had to support developing countries in getting access to clean technology. We'll have to make sure that the billion people who never switch a switch for electricity get clean off-grid electricity, and that will take them out of poverty. It will be a world of much better relationships, I believe, because we will need solidarity and empathy to get to that world. So I'm delighted that the focus is on rights and that will be your discussion, and I wish you all the best in that discussion.
Chad is a very vulnerable country. With the heat, we are experiencing now a very hot weather. The water is evaporating very easily and quickly, and the pasture is drying up. Many people do not know where is Chad. Chad is in the Central Africa, sitting between the Sahara, Sahel, and the forest. We are a very landlocked country. My name is Hindu Umaru Ibrahim. I'm coming from the Mbororo pastoralist community, who are the indigenous people of Chad. We are cattle holders, living from one place to another one to find pasture and waters. In my own lifetime, I observed the changing of weather. When I was so young, I was with my grandmother. We used to have a lot of milk. So I get the milk, then I sell it, then we get some money. But now, during the dry season, there is not enough milk. So it's not enough for the family. Then they cannot sell it. Our life and livelihood is linked to the environment, is depend to the environment. And when I grew up, I found that it's the climate change who is accelerating all this losing of biodiversity. And for me, it's not acceptable that we're losing all what we have. I don't have any other choice that to fight, and hopefully one day I can get a solution. The Conservation International Fellowship was very useful to my community because it changed one thing, giving chance of women and men sitting together discussing on one important issue to all the communities. From this fellowship, we organized some workshops with the communities. One of my goals was about the indigenous traditional knowledge. They are oral knowledge, but never documented So we need to see how they can be combined with the science and how it can help climate adaptation and mitigation. My vision for the future, it's how we can focus, all of us, for the solution, for the action, rather than just talking and negotiations. The climate change is not the history of indigenous people or in Chad or Africa. The climate change is a world challenge. If we want to save all the world, we have to do that all together.
Welcome to all participants of the Global Landscapes Forum from Women's Climate Centers International. We're a new NGO comprised of 9 civil society organizations from Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and the United States. And we're dedicated to building resilient communities that thrive in the face of our changing climate. Please let us introduce you to 5 of our East African leaders, Rosemary Atieno and Rose Wamawa from Kenya, and Constance Okolet, Comfort Hajra Mukasa, and Busingi Godliver from Uganda. All are experts in their own fields, and they have come together to build Women's Climate Centers International, because right now, the Earth needs powerful women.
We want our communities to work on their projects in a positive way, a sustainable way, without too much of donor dependency from the Western world. Because I believe, as Rosemary, that Africa has enough resources. All we need to do is to mobilize those resources, build the potential in our women, bring out that potential, and ensure that they work. So this organization was formed with a clear vision that we want a society where we all live free of oppression and all live decent lives. That's our bottom line. We want women to produce food around their backyards because it is possible. We want women to go back to our indigenous crops, indigenous potatoes, cassava, and indigenous traditional vegetables, given that the climate has become so bad that we need things that will survive short rain. And these are all crops that can survive the short rains. So our key engagement in climate change as at the moment is in helping women to come up with climate-smart agricultural practices at the household level.
My background is in engineering, technical. In relation to climate change, I work with grassroots women and train them in the construction of environmental friendly, low cost appropriate technologies like rainwater harvesting tanks, technologies like construction of eco-sun toilets so that we can use the manure back in the gardens, then agricultural practices like smart farming, where we are using biointensive farming on small gardens and using manure. We also advocate for tree planting in our communities with our women. We also train them in the use of filters, biosand filters, which is a very good technology whereby the community doesn't have to use or to cut trees to boil water, but they can use filters and clean their water. So basically that's what I've been doing in relation to climate change. The issue of climate change is very important to African women, and it really affects them because the women are the great bearers of climate change problems. And the women are the ones who are in direct contact with nature. The woman is the one who has to walk long distances to fetch water. The woman is the one who has to walk long distances to look for firewood, look for food to feed the family, which the food is not available because of climate changes and the droughts which are happening. So it's a real serious issue that is affecting the women, and we feel we need to form this movement so that we can help the women, empower the women to protect the environment.
When climate change happens, then all the basic needs that an African woman needs to survive is affected. So because of climate change, the water points that used to be closer to women have dried up, and now women have to walk for long distances. In some communities, like where we have Uganda Women's Water Initiative, women have to walk for about an hour. just to reach a water source, and when they reach there, they have to queue in a line to get this water because it's shared by communities. Unfortunately, this water is not even safe because then it's also water that animals use. So this, therefore, has to be taken on by the women themselves. It's their mantle to lead. So, and also the climate change then affects food production. Women used to grow food like in their backyard. Now they can't do that anymore because we no longer have a season. Even when you have rains, it's destructive. It's no longer rain that will enhance and harness growth of crops. Instead, it's destructive. And then the dry season comes in, and so without a season, and I'm a woman, so together with the women, we need to come together and find solutions on how to survive with this climate change, but also try together and develop very low cost solutions to climate change using local available technologies. And
the women now know the value of having trees, because when you plant tree, you are planting shade, you are planting the oxygen, you are planting the food, you are planting the because they are preventing the soil erosion. There's so many things about the tree, and you find that they are planting it every season, planting of trees, and it has now even changed as a business. You find most people do it as a business. They put it in the nursery during the dry season, and they pot it. After potting it, when it grows, the tree seedlings, people come and buy. Why do people buy? They used not to buy, but these days they know the value of a tree.
There is a high time that women in Africa and all over the world just to, raise up their voices and defend their rights. So that is how I came into the issue of championing for women's rights, and more specifically environmental conservation. When you talk about an African woman, you talk about water, you talk about food security, you talk about health issues. You cannot separate an African woman from all these issues. And when you talk about climate change, you cannot also separate climate change and water access. You cannot separate climate change and food security. You cannot separate climate change and health issues. So that is why I'm saying that women in Africa have a big role to play when it comes to issues of climate change. It is our responsibility as African women to stand up, and with our meager resources, with whatever that we have, let us not wait for America to come and help us. Let us not wait for anyone else to come. Let us start an initiative. And when you start an initiative, someone else will come to join us. So African women, we have a role to play in climate change.
And one of the best Rick fits too in the whole show. He's so sick for that.
It's so weird how global warming could not be a thing, but there's more money to make in destroying the environment than keeping it the way it is. I think it's more about 2 or 3 generations down when everything actually intensifies and starts shifting. If it comes down to the world burning down, who gives a shit about a pair of jeans that looks cool? So it's about functionality, making a fireproof jacket. That's why the approach of it is less of an aesthetic design or trying to make it look as cool as possible. It's trying to get it to be functional in multiple ways. I looked at it from a more technical standpoint more than a fashion standpoint. It's also so easy to like be a pretend activist and not actually take actions on anything. You press 4 buttons and post it to 6,000 people. In reality, it's like, what did you actually do to like change the world?
Most people heard on the news about the Malibu, like Woolsey Canyon fire. So that could be a symptom of global warming, you know, like these more intense forest fires. So it like speaks to the narrative just directly. I mean, like Luca was saying, he designed the collection less to be like fashion week and more like, this is what you will need when this inevitably happens if we don't stop.
And it's pretty cool, it's good, so it's like I might as well push that agenda onto the people that I influence, and they can take it for what it is or they cannot. I mean, it's up to them. If we both leave the conversation with more information, then we went in and everybody wins.
That's like all I think we're going for. Just like more education and more solid opinions.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm an interdisciplinary artist from Manila, the Philippines. I use art, science, and design to redefine our relationship with nature. Here are some of my bodies of work. The Apocalypse Project investigates climate change and our environmental futures through interactive art science projects. Climate Change Couture explores what we could wear under climate change, especially during specific scenarios such as superstorms and extreme heat. The Ephemeral Marvels perfume store is a perfume line of things we could lose because of climate change. The Sewer Soapery turns raw sewage into soaps to raise awareness on improper waste practices and fatbergs that are clogging up the sewers, which will worsen conditions in cities, especially as storms become stronger. The Planetary Renewal Spa is a series of self-care performance rituals that illuminate the effects of climate change. The spa currently offers 2 services: back massage to simulate hurricanes and disappearing honey facial. Future Feast looks at potential food of the future as we struggle to feed a growing population amidst climate change effects. Wild Science interrogates the role of science in society, especially in the context of our post-truth era. Letters for Science is a participatory project that asks the public to write letters to people who do not believe in science, such as those who do not believe climate change is real, people who think that the Earth is flat, that evolution is fake, those who think that we did not land on the moon, or that vaccines cause autism. The idea is to explain the science to these people and ask them to get on the side of science, because I think that a better informed public helps society in general, especially when it comes to policymaking. Scientific Method is a photography project that documents scientific processes and experiments so that the public can get a better understanding of these methodologies that are usually not seen. So why do I do this? I think that systemic things such as fascism and capitalism have made living very challenging, and it has led to inequality, the destruction of nature, erosion of our relationships with each other and with ourselves, and other things that have inspired me to keep going as an artist because it gives me a lot of hope. What's great about being an artist is that I have the freedom to talk to people from all walks of life and to engage people in conversation about the things that I believe are relevant, especially climate change and its related topics, which will be one of the most important topics in the decades to come. And because art can get our mindsets to be more elastic, it can facilitate alternative solutions to problems. As an artist and a writer, I find that my projects give my life a lot of meaning, and it helps me connect to people such as you, so I invite you guys to reach out, collaborate, and participate because we all need each other if we want to live in a better future. Thanks.
A paradigm shift is a change in common sense. But how do you go about rearranging common sense? Especially with years of research and journalism making the conversation long and dense. Well, sense isn't something to try and enforce. It should be kind of endorsed by a reliable source. And in the case of climate change, a good place to start would be science, of course. Now, you remember science from school, an essential subject. Well, let's consider it standing in the general public. Our scientists are in a position to advise us on some of our biggest decisions, and it's probably in our interest to listen, but also to invite others to witness the vision. The first way to do that is to be the vision. Through your lifestyle choices, you can lead the mission. Bring the future to your present when it seems a bit distant. The cleanest existence is green and efficient. And you haven't really played your part until your lifestyle reflects a change of heart. It's a continuous process. I'm still working on it myself, but technology plays a major part. I'm trying to play my part as an artist, but all I do is write verses and harmonize melodies. Now, the point of us working together on this is that one of you knows how to decarbonize energy. So if you could consider that when making your plans, I'm happy to leave it in your capable hands. This is the solution government can't offer: ground-level collaboration. Doesn't it sound better than having patience? Instead of sleepwalking into the governance trap, using our imagination to take initiative as a nation, which involves looking at our economic ambitions to ensure that, as well as earning ourselves more and banking ourselves more, we're actually doing things we're thanking ourselves for in the long run. Because a lucrative plan is a smart one, but a sustainable plan is a strong one.
Hello, my name is Matthew Ritz. I'm a Swiss-born visual storyteller. And today it's an honor to be able to address the Global Landscape Forum. For the last 5 years, I've been traveling the world in order to witness and document the global issue of the rising sea due to climate change. I focus my work on Kiribati. Kiribati is a nation north of Fiji, in the middle of the Pacific. It's actually a very large ocean state, as wide as Australia. Yes, it had a small landmass and 150 inhabitants, but still, it's a nation state. And what really struck me the first time I went to Kiribati is like I never actually heard about the country before. And here we go. We have this huge ocean state in the middle of the Pacific that's going to be ripped up by the rising sea within the century. So during the process of documenting the issue of the rising sea in Kiribati, I met with President Tong, and I had a great privilege and honor to be able to shadow him for 4 years as he was traveling the world, trying to ring the alarm bell around what was happening in this country. And Kiribati people have a very, very strong spiritual connection to the land. As indigenous people, and most indigenous people around the planet, they still keep these traditions and connection, spiritual connection to the land. And the big looming question is, yes, they will go away, and yes, they will find new home in New Zealand and surrounding country, but what will happen with the spiritual connection to the land? And I think that's a very important question to be raised, because we may find technical and technological solution. As for instance, the Japanese are building floating island, and they try now to sell the technology to Kiribati. But you know, they don't have the money and the means to buy a very expensive technological floating island. And this is also a very big ethical and moral issue, as Kiribati is the first in a nation with the smallest footprint in the planet, but yet they're the first affected by the global climate change issues that are provoked by the wealthiest nation. But yet that technology will not save them. And again, even if we put those floating islands in Kiribati, will the spirits follow? When people will be living in artificial island, they will lose the connection to the land forever. So I really invite you to look at a short video on the New York Times doc called like a floating island, and also the work I did with Annotate Tong called Annotate's Ark. You can find it on annotateark.com. Thank you so much for taking the time listening to me.
Kiribati is in the center of the world. So it's right there, bang in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So far away, so isolated. We thought it would be immune from the tribulations of this world. The issue of climate change remains the most pressing challenge for us in Kiribati.
Rising sea levels have already taken a village on one of your islands. Do you see the possibility of all the people from Kiribati one day having to leave?
For those of us on the front line, it really does not matter what is agreed to in Paris, because we will continue to go underwater.
If it is a foregone conclusion no matter what happens, what's the point of a deal then?
Well, what's the point? Well, we need to survive. What is going to happen to us is going to be the fate of the rest who will follow.
Hi to everyone at the Global Landscapes Forum. My name's Steve Trent and I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Justice Foundation. EJF works to bring together issues of environmental security and human rights, and nowhere can I see those two issues coming together more seriously than in climate change. For the last decade and more, we've worked to give a voice to those who are the most vulnerable at the front of climate change, very often those who have been forced to leave their homes by the result of extreme weather events, floods and storms, or slow onset events such as desertification and drought. We believe that they are victim of a terrible set of circumstance where all too often they've contributed the least to our global climate warming, and yet they have been affected first and worst. But I suppose my key message in this short film is to say it does not have to be this way. It is not too late to roll back unstoppable climate change. We all have a role to play as individuals and collectively. We can change the way we live, we can demand more and better from our political leaders, and we can stop and end our addiction to carbon. If we do this and we take action now, then the worst effects of climate change can be avoided. The time is right. The time is now. We can't afford to delay. So to all of you at the forum, I say take these messages and turn them into action, and together we can achieve something that will define the future of this planet.
No way. You will not make the Netherlands home.
If we want to protect our societies, if we want to stop the criminal trafficking gangs from benefiting as they are, we must stop the boats coming.
Squads of riot police pushing ever deeper into the jungle camp.
If Europe thinks they have a problem with migration today caused by the Arab Spring and what's happened in the Middle East, wait 20 years and see what climate change drives people out of Africa, the Sahel especially, and we're talking now not just 1 or 2 million, 10 or 20, and they're not going to South Africa, they're going across the Mediterranean.
Very simple terms, in the years preceding 2011, which
was the year of the Arab uprisings, there had been terrible drought conditions in North Africa and the Levant, and this had particularly hit the Syrians very badly. As a precursor, it was one of the factors that led to the conditions that made Syria explode. I think there's no doubt the drought played a major role. The consequences of the Syrian war, most notably the incredible outmigration of Syrians to neighboring countries and then ultimately to Europe, which has caused the worst crisis in Europe since World War II, all can be traced backwards to some extent to, a drought that occurred in the Middle East between 2004 and 2011.
10 meters of sea level rise, I think, would displace roughly 500 million, about 500 million people. And Syria has been less than 1 million refugees, 750,000 about, into the EU. Less than 1 million have shaken the EU to its core. Multiply by 500 and tell me there are not going to be any security issues.
It is places where people are poor, where the climate is likely to be the most severe, where the changes will be the most severe, that we need to look. Southeast Asia is certainly part of that. Arid countries, the Middle East, South America. We've not even begun to explore the challenges in Latin America.
Some would equate it to the battleship that's got the momentum, and if you don't start to stop it now, the momentum's just going to keep it going for quite a while. Even if you start now to stop climate change, we have to start now.
What we're talking about here is an existential threat to our civilization in the longer term. In the short term, it carries all sorts of risks as well. And it requires a human response on a scale that has never been achieved before.
My name is Rogers Govender, and I'm the Dean of Manchester. And I have the enormous privilege of working at the cathedral, which is really in the heart of the city of Manchester. And we do some incredible things here, in addition to our 3 acts of worship every day. One of the exciting things for me is that we have gathered a number of colleagues from other faith communities. And we have been meeting to discuss a range of common issues, issues of concern to us. So we do a lot of work around challenging hate. We do a lot of work on modern slavery. And one of the exciting pieces of work is that over the last 3 years, we've developed some really good interfaith work around climate change issues. And I've been very fortunate to be working with people like Johnny Sadler and Phil Corbell from the Carbon Literacy Project to see how faith communities could make a difference in tackling climate change issues with a view to reducing our carbon footprint. The faith communities in the city, when I say the city, I mean Greater Manchester, have hundreds of thousands of buildings, churches, gurdwaras, mosques, synagogues, as well as places where the clergy live, their homes. And then you've got all the church halls and temple halls in these places. They all consume a fair amount of carbon, often needing to be retrofit in terms of their carbon output. So we've been meeting regularly to do that kind of work, and it's all very positive, and there's some exciting things ahead. My vision really is for this cathedral to be a community hub for a variety of needs, for people who often don't feel that they're welcome in this place because it's such an English sort of establishment. And my vision is for this cathedral to be making a difference in the life of the city, to be adding value to the life of the city, and to be an inclusive place where the entire community, whether you're black or white, or Christian or Jewish or Hindu, whether you're straight or gay, it doesn't matter, that your humanity matters more than anything else.
Without substantial change getting the greenhouse gas emissions down, we are on a path to large increases in the planet's temperature. You hear a lot about the progress in reducing the cost of renewable energy to make electricity. But generating electricity isn't the only contributor to climate change. It accounts for only about 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions. With greenhouse gases, you have the electricity sector, but you also have manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, buildings, as well as about 10% from other sources. We need innovation, going out there and finding inventors across all these different areas and understanding their energy R&D activities to make sure that they have a path from their laboratory to scaling up into very large numbers. For electricity, wind energy and solar energy, prices are coming down. So the electricity sector has to either be able to store that energy or have other zero-emission sources to maintain the reliability that we all depend on. Manufacturing. Here we're talking about all the stuff we buy, furniture, beds, the cars themselves, all of those things. Just the very process of making cement is CO2 emitting. There's a lot of embedded energy. We'll have to change the way that we do that manufacturing. Transportation. Immediately people think about passenger cars, and they are a big part of that. But transportation is quite broad. We've got railroads, we've got ships, we've got planes, and so every one of those has to get to zero emission. Agriculture. This is a category that often people forget about. Cows actually emit quite a bit of methane, which is one of the more powerful greenhouse gases. And so inventions like artificial meat may have to play a role here. Buildings. We need to invent different processes in order to get the energy used in running all these buildings down, way down to zero. The path to success is going to require innovation across every one of these sectors. So it is quite daunting. During this century, we not only need to invent all of these things, we actually need to deploy them at massive, massive scale. But in my experience, innovation can do magical things.
Some Mi'kmaq elders came up with this theoretical framework, and it's called two-eyed seeing. So one eye sees with an Anishinaabe or an indigenous perspective, and the other eye sees with the other kind of Western thinking or science. The satellite imagery has a lot to offer our communities, and we will bring our knowledge and our needs to that data. We don't even have a word for environment in my culture. We say gedakimanan, and that means everything in creation. We didn't have to look at the decoupling of those systems. They were already interconnected. It's in our language, it's in our teachings, it's in our ceremonies. And so I think that perspective is going to be really helpful for coming up with new ways of looking at how we solve the global climate crisis. I'm interested in large-scale transformative change, so looking at complexity theory, systems thinking, and using those tools within our communities, Indigenous communities, to tackle wicked problems. We're not the boss of nature and creation, we're actually the younger siblings, and that's the humility that we should be approaching the earth and care of the earth and the biosphere and all of those things. So Waterloo's at the forefront of wanting to solve these problems, of wanting to contribute to how are we going to address climate change.
Chris Russell. I've been a science and environmental journalist for decades and have followed the climate change story. I'm hopeful that we're finally getting to a point, rather than hammering the public with catastrophe and the fact that the world is not going to survive, that we're actually looking at solutions, what global solutions are, what individual solutions are. And I do think the human condition is such, when you're on deadline, and we are on deadline to do something about climate change, that is happening now. And I think journalists can do a better job to show what some of these solutions are, what the innovations are as well.
I visited Kerala in the first week of July this year. The beauty of Kerala mesmerized me. 20 days after my return, I got to know about the floods in Kerala. The gravity of the situation dawned on me when I realized how easily it could have been me struggling there with the loss of property or maybe life as well. This calamity too was linked to climate change, and I came to a conclusion that I cannot leave this to others. If something needs to be done about climate change, it has to start with me. Because of my work, I got an opportunity to meet the youngest Indian who went for an expedition to Antarctica with 2041 Foundation, a foundation which was started by Sir Robert Swan, who is the first person in the history to walk both the North and the South Pole. He faced life-threatening situations as a direct result of the climate change, and that's when he felt that climate change is imperative and realized the need to save our planet. Every year, Sir Robert Swan leads 80 change makers and leaders from all over the world on an expedition to the North and the South Pole to understand the effects of the climate change and to implement those solutions in their own regions. I'm so grateful that I have been selected among those 80 people from all over the world to represent India for an expedition in Arctic. Growing up, I was always a shy kid, and it was too difficult for me to find a place for myself in the crowd. 10 years down the line, I'm now raising the aspirations of young India through the power of storytelling at Josh Talks. I lead business partnerships and multifold the impact by collaborating with the organizations who share the same vision and which want to create an impact in the world. In the past, I've been actively working on building communities to create awareness about the climate change. When floods happened in Kerala, I felt so helpless, as all I could do was to send funds and prayers for the people who were struggling there for their survival. Our whole planet is at stake. We cannot wait for disasters to hit us one after the other. We need to understand the problem at the macro level and create solutions to bring a change.
Para combatir el cambio climático se puede, bien, siempre y cuando que haya consentimiento de todos los humanos, ¿no? Porque si nosotros mismos somos los que estamos provocando, y nosotros mismos también deberíamos controlar esto para que no vayamos sufriendo de aquí para allá.
Hello everybody at the Global Landscapes Forum. I'm Natalie Isaacs. I am the founder of 1 Million Women. We are a global movement of women and girls fighting the climate crisis through building a lifestyle revolution, through our daily lives, through every single thing we do, through every choice we make, through every dollar we spend or we don't spend. You know, I don't need to tell you that climate change and action on climate change needs us all. It needs governments and politicians, it needs cities, it needs communities, it needs households, and it needs individuals, and it needs us all. It needs us all to act at the same time. And that piece about how you live goes to the heart and soul of what 1 Million Women is all about. We give these bite-sized actions with real and tangible results and take you along the road of empowerment. And we've come a long way. We've been around for 10 years now, and 1 Million Women is 880,000 women and girls. Last month our social media reach was 49 million, and that was all organic. In the last 10 years of doing 1 Million Women, there are 3 things that I know to be true. That women are glorious agents of change. That it is really hard to profoundly change the way that you live, because to do it, we have to get ourselves outside of this structured framework of our high consumption society. And that to change the way that we live, we have to madly and deeply fall in love with our earth. We have to love it like we do our family and friends. We have to understand that every single thing that we do shapes the world. We have to feel that in our hearts, not just articulate it in our heads. And when we do, changing the way that we live and profoundly making that stick becomes a much easier proposition. I know that because that's what happened to me, and I witness it every single day with the women in our 1 Million Women community. In the last 10 years, I have seen this conversation go from just getting to understand that we need to act to people acting in every aspect of our lives. We are having more conversations about food waste, about unsustainable fashion, about microbeads and plastics in the ocean. You know, 10 years ago in Australia, there were a couple of thousand households, or I think 15,000 households with rooftop solar, and today there are nearly 2 million. That's what gives me hope, that we as individuals and as a collective have the power to change the world through every single thing we do. Thank you.
The chance to turn the pages over. We can write what we want to write. We gotta make ends meet before we get much older. We're all someone's daughter. We're all someone's son. Someone's son. Down the barrel of a gun. Oh, you're the voice, try and understand it. Make a noise and make it clear. Whoa, whoa. We're not gonna sit in silence. We're not gonna live with fear.